In the quiet town of New Hope, Tennessee, nestled among the rolling hills, lived 80-year-old Thomas Jacobs. He was known for his unwavering faith, spending decades as a lay preacher and community leader. His hair had turned silver, his hands weathered by time, but his heart remained full of vigor. He had seen many things in his lifetime: wars, political upheaval, and social revolutions. But it was the changing landscape of faith and morality that troubled him the most in his final years. On a chilly October morning, Thomas fell ill. His breathing slowed, and the bright light of day seemed to fade as his soul prepared to depart. Surrounded by family, friends, and loved ones in his humble home, Thomas slipped away peacefully, leaving behind a legacy of love and service. His passing was mourned by many in the community, who knew him as a beacon of strength and wisdom. However, what no one expected was what happened next. Thomas's body lay still in the church where he had spent so many years leading Sunday services. His family and friends gathered for his wake, praying for his soul, reflecting on his life, and cherishing the memories they had with him. But at the midnight hour, something incredible occurred. As the clock struck 12, Thomas's body stirred. His chest heaved with a sudden breath, and his eyes flickered open, filled with an otherworldly light. For a moment, he simply stared at the ceiling, disoriented and confused. The room fell into stunned silence. Those present could not believe their eyes. "Father?" whispered his daughter Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Thomas slowly sat up, his voice trembling. I have seen the Lord, Jesus, he spoke to me." Thomas's eyes glistened as he recounted his journey. In his vision, he was lifted from his body and taken through a tunnel of light beyond time and space to a realm that was indescribable. There, he saw Jesus Christ sitting on a radiant throne, surrounded by countless angels, their wings like flames of glory. "Thomas," Jesus had spoken, his voice both gentle and powerful, "I have brought you back for a purpose. A great reckoning is coming for your nation, and you must deliver my message." Thomas, still in awe, asked, "Lord, what do you want of me?" "Tell them," Jesus replied. "Tell them that the time for division has ended. My followers must unite, not only in faith but in action. Your country stands at a precipice, and one man has been chosen to lead through this storm. His name is Donald Trump." Thomas's heart raced. He had heard of the former president, but he never imagined that God would speak of him directly. "What must be done?" Thomas asked. "Trump has been chosen as a vessel," Jesus said. "He must heed the call to righteousness, seek wisdom from my word, and lead with a heart of repentance. He has been a man of great influence, but now he must humble himself before me, for his actions will shape the future of your nation." The vision shifted, and Jesus revealed images of the country in turmoil, cities divided, people in chaos, and spiritual darkness creeping in. "The time is short, Thomas," Jesus warned. "Trump must choose the path of light over the path of pride. You will tell him this: I am with him, but he must turn his heart to me." With that, Thomas was returned to his body, his spirit heavy with the weight of the message. Word spread quickly of Thomas's miraculous return, and the town was abuzz with curiosity. His testimony was met with a mixture of awe and skepticism, especially when he spoke of Jesus' message for Donald Trump. Some called it divine, others dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. However, Thomas knew in his heart that what he had experienced was real, and he was determined to fulfill the task given to him. In Washington, the news of Thomas's return reached Trump's inner circle. At first, the former president was skeptical, dismissing it as just another religious fervor. But something about the sincerity in Thomas's eyes and the gravity of the message struck a chord with him. One evening, Trump, now in the midst of a turbulent post-presidency life, sat alone in his study. He had been reflecting on his own journey, his rise to power, his battles, and his eventual fall from grace. He felt empty, as if something was missing, but he didn't know what. That's when his assistant came in with the news. "Pastor Thomas Jacobs, sir. He says he has a message for you." The meeting took place at Mar-a-Lago, the luxurious estate that had once been the epicenter of his political campaign. Trump sat across from Thomas, both men silent at first. Thomas could see the weight of the world on Trump's shoulders, but he also saw the flicker of hope in his eyes. After a moment of silence, Thomas spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Trump, I have been sent with a message. It's not for you to ignore. The Lord has spoken, and you have been chosen to lead in this hour of darkness." Trump, ever the skeptic but intrigued, leaned forward. "What do you mean? I'm just a man, like anyone else." Thomas placed a hand on the table, his old fingers trembling but his words steady. "You were chosen, sir, chosen to turn this nation back to its roots. But you must seek wisdom from the Bible, from Jesus. It is not about power, it's about repentance, humility, and a willingness to lead with faith." Trump paused, deep in thought. His mind raced, but something about Thomas's unwavering certainty made him wonder, could this be true? Could his path really be part of a larger, divine plan? For weeks after the meeting, Trump grappled with the message Thomas had given him. He began reading the Bible, studying the scriptures, and seeking guidance from prominent religious figures who had always been in his circle. But the deeper he went, the more he realized the urgency of Thomas's words. He started attending private Bible studies, praying with a fervor he had never known before. Though many of his old allies and critics mocked him for this newfound spiritual journey, Trump remained undeterred. He began publicly speaking about the importance of faith, of repentance, and of seeking guidance from Jesus Christ. His actions didn't go unnoticed. His political rivals mocked his transformation, but millions of Americans rallied behind him, believing that his change of heart could be the spark the country needed. Trump's message of unity, humility, and faith began to resonate even among those who had once opposed him. As the nation continued to divide, Thomas, along with Trump, organized a national day of prayer. It was broadcast live, and millions of people across the country tuned in to hear the message of faith, repentance, and unity. Trump took the stage, holding up his Bible, and spoke from his heart. "We are at a crossroads," he said, his voice powerful but humble. "But we are not without hope. Jesus has shown us the way. It's time to return to faith, to turn our hearts back to Him, and to lead with righteousness. We are a nation founded on the belief that we are one under God. It is time to act on that belief." As the prayer ended, a quiet calm settled over the nation. Though many challenges lay ahead, Thomas knew that the seeds of change had been planted. Jesus had spoken to him, and now the nation had a leader willing to listen. The days that followed were filled with hope, but also with opposition. Prominent figures from every political and religious background began to speak out, some in favor of Trump's newfound faith, others fiercely opposed. But through it all, Trump remained steadfast, knowing that his mission was not just political, it was spiritual. And as for Thomas, his mission was complete. He had delivered the message from Jesus, and the path ahead was now in the hands of those willing to embrace it. With a peaceful heart, he passed away shortly after, knowing that he had played his part in God's greater plan. In the years that followed, the nation experienced a profound transformation. Trump continued his journey of faith, and America slowly began to heal. The power of repentance, unity, and divine guidance shaped a new era of leadership. And as the country moved forward, the message of Jesus Christ remained at the center of it all: love, faith, and a call to humility above all. As the years passed, after the National Day of Prayer, a sense of peace began to sweep across the country. People were beginning to rediscover their faith. Many who had once mocked Trump for his newfound faith saw changes in him. His speeches were less combative, more reflective, and filled with a sense of spiritual humility. Those who had supported him in the past, and even those who had once opposed him, saw something different in him now. But that peace was fragile, and deep beneath the surface, a storm was gathering. Despite his efforts to lead with faith and unity, political divisions continued to grow. There were whispers of betrayal within his inner circle, and doubts were creeping in from all sides. Some of his closest allies, both political and religious, began questioning his commitment to faith, suspecting that his spiritual journey might be a way to regain power rather than a true transformation. The media, ever skeptical, pounced on every misstep, portraying his religious turn as a mere publicity stunt. Thomas's daughter, Sarah, visited him one afternoon at Mar-a-Lago, where Trump had been staying. The walls of the estate, once a symbol of wealth and power, now seemed to carry an air of uncertainty. Sarah had always been a steady presence in her father's life, supporting him through every challenge. But even she had begun to worry. "Father," Sarah said quietly, "are you sure about this? I mean, look around you. The pressure, the constant attacks. Do you really believe this is what Jesus wants?" Trump, sitting by the large window overlooking the golf course, turned toward her. There was a sadness in his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. "I don't know, Sarah," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was on the right path, but it's becoming harder. People don't believe in the change I've made. They think it's a game, but I feel something inside me, urging me to keep going." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her voice trembling with emotion. "But at what cost, Father? You've already sacrificed so much. Maybe it's time to let go." Trump looked out the window again, his eyes narrowing. "I can't let go. Not when the country needs this change. Not when Jesus has shown me a new way." Sarah's heart ached for her father. She wanted to believe in him, but the tension and chaos surrounding him had only increased. She knew he had been transformed in many ways, but the weight of leadership was more than he had ever imagined. The whispers of betrayal within Trump's circle were becoming louder. One evening, just days before a major national address, a high-ranking advisor named Robert Warren, a man who had been close to Trump for years, approached him with an ultimatum. "Mr. Trump," Robert said, his tone sharp and urgent, You need to stop all this talk about Jesus and faith. It's alienating our supporters. We have a real chance at regaining power, but not if you keep playing the religious card." Trump looked at Robert, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What are you suggesting? That I abandon everything I've come to believe? That I ignore the call I received?" Robert hesitated for a moment, clearly calculating his words. "I'm saying you need to focus on what works, on the things that won you the presidency. Faith is fine for the base, but you need to be stronger on policy. You're letting your message get watered down." Trump stood up, his fist clenching. "You think I'm watering down my message? You think this is some kind of game to me?" Robert stepped back, clearly realizing that he had gone too far. "I'm just saying, Mr. Trump, we need to focus on what's practical. We need to win. And you can't do that by being a preacher." For a moment, Trump was silent, his mind racing. He had already sacrificed so much of his past life. He had opened his heart to the teachings of Jesus. But now it seemed as though his closest allies were turning against him. He knew the country was at a crossroads, but was this truly the path he had been chosen to walk? The betrayal cut deeper than he had expected. Robert had been a trusted confidant for years, but now it seemed as if everyone was trying to pull him away from the very thing that had changed him. In the solitude of his study that night, Trump sat with a Bible open in front of him. He began reading the Gospel of Matthew, remembering the words of Jesus that had moved him so profoundly. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing on him, but something stirred in his soul. The Spirit of God seemed to whisper to him in that quiet room, "This is not just about politics. This is about the soul of your nation." As he read the words of Jesus, "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" Trump was struck with a clarity he had never known before. This wasn't about winning for himself. It wasn't about regaining power or status. It was about something far greater. He realized that his journey had only just begun, and the path ahead would not be easy. There would be sacrifices, betrayals, and doubts. But if he truly believed in the message of Jesus, he could not turn back. As dawn broke over the horizon, Trump fell to his knees. He knew he was at a crossroads, one that required him to decide between his past ambitions and the path of righteousness. With a deep, prayerful heart, he asked for strength and guidance. "Lord, if this is your will, show me the way. Help me lead this nation with the humility and faith you've called me to." The news of Trump's renewed commitment to his faith began to spread like wildfire across the country. His supporters hailed his decision as a courageous stand for Christian values, while his critics lambasted him for what they saw as a political maneuver to gain favor with the religious right. The media frenzy reached new heights, with pundits on both sides weighing in on his transformation. In Washington, a group of powerful figures who had once been close allies to Trump began to rally against him. They saw his newfound faith as a threat to their own agendas and political power. Behind closed doors, they began plotting to discredit him, using his religious journey against him to weaken his influence. But Trump, now more resolute than ever, refused to be shaken. He knew the battle ahead would be fierce, but he had learned one vital lesson: the truth of his faith was stronger than any political maneuver. As the country watched, divided between hope and skepticism, Trump prepared for the most significant speech of his life, one that would either solidify his place in history or lead to his downfall. On the eve of the speech, as the world waited with bated breath, Trump sat alone in his office. The weight of the moment was heavy on his shoulders. His phone buzzed with messages from allies and critics alike, urging him to choose his words carefully. But in that quiet room, a sense of peace descended upon him. The message he had received was clear. It wasn't about pleasing people. It was about fulfilling a higher calling. In the morning, as the cameras focused on him, Trump stood before the nation. His heart was calm, his voice steady, but the conviction in his words was unmistakable. "My fellow Americans," he began, "I stand before you today not as a politician, but as a man who has found a new path. The journey I've walked has been long and at times uncertain, but through it all, I have felt the presence of something greater than myself." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, knowing that his words would be scrutinized by millions. "I have been called to lead this nation, not with power, but with humility, not with division, but with unity. And I ask for your prayers, your support, and your faith as we move forward together under the guidance of Jesus Christ." For a brief moment there was silence, but then the applause began, soft at first, but gradually growing louder. The nation was watching, waiting for a leader who would rise above the fray and lead with faith. And in that moment, it seemed as though a new chapter for America was beginning, one that would be written not in the halls of power, but in the hearts of its people. The days following Trump's speech marked a profound shift in the country. Though his words were met with mixed reactions, the faith-driven rhetoric seemed to resonate deeply with many Americans. For those who had supported him in the past, it felt like a return to something deeply spiritual. But for others, especially those in the political elite, the growing influence of his message was cause for concern. Sarah Trump, his daughter, couldn't shake the feeling that her father was being pulled into a spiritual battle much larger than anyone anticipated. As she sat in her office one afternoon watching the news coverage, she felt the weight of everything that had transpired. "Father," she said, texting him, "are you sure this is the path? It's not just about us anymore. The country's entire future is on the line." Trump's response came minutes later, simple but resolute. "Sarah, the message is clear. This is bigger than politics. We are at the crossroads. I will not be swayed." His decision was final, but the storm was only beginning. The political divide in America only deepened in the weeks that followed. The more Trump embraced his faith, the more his adversaries latched onto the notion that his spirituality was a front, an attempt to strengthen his grip on power by pandering to the Christian base. Every word he spoke was dissected by pundits, critics, and allies alike, each trying to claim the narrative as their own. But even within his own ranks, tensions began to rise. Prominent figures who had once been close to him in the White House found themselves questioning his path. Robert Warren, once one of his most trusted advisors, convened a meeting with the top members of Trump's campaign team to discuss the growing situation. "You know this isn't working, right?" Robert said, his voice tense. "We need him to focus on policy, not religion. The Christian rhetoric isn't winning us any new votes." John Ellis, a former evangelical leader who had become a staunch Trump ally, stood up, his face red with frustration. "It's not just about votes. He's trying to show the world that we are a nation of faith. But every time we let our beliefs guide our policies, we risk losing everything." The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. The heart of the debate wasn't about policy or even politics. It was about what Trump stood for. And as the conversation grew more heated, the underlying truth became clear. For Trump, this was not a game. This was about a message from heaven, a new calling, and a new direction for the country, one that would challenge the very fabric of American politics. Amidst the chaos, there was an unexpected twist. A prominent figure, former President Bill Clinton, shocked the nation by announcing that he had been in deep conversation with Trump over the past few months, trying to understand his faith journey. "I've been wrong," Clinton said in a televised address. "For years, I underestimated the power of faith in shaping this nation. I've seen a man change, genuinely, and I believe it's time for us to put aside our differences and focus on what's best for America." The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a sign of hope, an olive branch from a former political rival. Others felt that Clinton was simply trying to capitalize on Trump's growing influence. But one thing was clear: Trump's message was reaching the highest levels of American politics. In the weeks that followed, Clinton became an unexpected ally to Trump. They began to meet regularly, discussing faith, policy, and the future of the nation. Trump often leaned on Clinton's wisdom, while Clinton, in turn, marveled at the transformation he saw in Trump's heart. "You're a different man, Donald," Clinton said one afternoon, his voice full of admiration. "I can't say I always agreed with your methods, but I see now that your faith is real. You are moving in a direction I never expected." Trump looked at him, his eyes full of gratitude. "It's not about me, Bill. It's about this nation, our people. We need to come together, and it starts with faith." As summer turned to fall, the divisions within the nation reached a fever pitch. Trump's leadership was being challenged not just from within his own party, but from all sides. Political figures across the spectrum began to turn against him, seeing his focus on faith as a distraction from the real issues. But then, something extraordinary happened. A massive wave of support surged in unexpected places. Thousands of Christian leaders across the country rallied behind Trump's vision for a faith-centered America. Church pastors from every denomination, Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, came together to host a nationwide rally, calling for a return to biblical values in the nation's leadership. "The time has come," one prominent pastor declared from the stage, "for us to stand together, united in faith. We are called to lead with humility, with love, and with a message of Jesus Christ. This is not a time for division, it's a time for healing." The crowd erupted in applause, and in that moment, it seemed as though the nation was ready to unite under a common cause, faith. As Trump stood on the stage, his hand raised in prayer, the entire crowd joined in unison, singing hymns and offering prayers for the future of the nation. There, in that powerful moment, Trump knew that this was more than just about him. This was about the soul of America. The battle for America's soul had begun, and it was a battle that would require every ounce of faith, humility, and courage that Trump and the nation had. With the country on the brink of a major election, Trump faced the greatest decision of his life. His opponents were fierce, and the political world had never been more polarized. But he knew that his legacy wasn't going to be defined by policies or political victories. It would be defined by whether or not he had stayed true to the message Jesus had entrusted him with. On the eve of the election, Trump gathered his closest allies together in a private meeting. The stakes were higher than ever before. His campaign manager, Sarah, looked at him with a mix of concern and hope. "Dad, we've come this far," she said, her voice steady. "But we need to make sure that we're doing this for the right reasons, not just for power, but because we believe in the change you're trying to bring." Trump looked around the room, his eyes meeting the faces of those who had stood by him through thick and thin. In that moment, he understood the gravity of the choice before him. He could continue to fight for power and control, or he could surrender his own desires for the good of the nation. As the dawn of Election Day approached, Trump knelt down in prayer, asking for strength, for guidance, and for a renewed sense of purpose. "Lord, give me the wisdom to lead with your love, not my ambition. Help me to be the leader this nation needs." And with that prayer, he knew what the future held was far greater than any political battle. It was the future of a nation rooted in faith, in Jesus Christ, and in the values that had always been at its heart. The days leading up to the election were fraught with tension, and the nation found itself at a crossroads. Trump's message had stirred something deep within the American consciousness, a yearning for faith and hope amidst the chaos. But with this surge of spiritual awakening came a new sense of peril. The adversaries of his cause, both political and spiritual, were relentless. In the final days before the election, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. News outlets were flooded with stories of division, protests, and even violence. Trump knew that, despite all his efforts, a storm was brewing. The nation was torn, and the forces of evil seemed to be rallying against the message of light and hope that had emerged from his campaign. One evening, as Trump sat in the Oval Office, the weight of the world pressing upon him, he received an unexpected visitor, an old friend and spiritual guide, Pastor Jonathan Wells. Pastor Wells had been a steadfast supporter of Trump's faith journey from the beginning, always encouraging him to lean on the teachings of Jesus Christ. "Donald, I can feel the weight on your shoulders," Pastor Wells said as he sat across from Trump, his eyes filled with compassion. "But I want you to remember something. You're not in this fight alone. Jesus is with you. The message he has placed in your heart is powerful, and it's what this country needs right now." Trump looked up at Pastor Wells, his face weary but determined. "I've done everything I can to lead this country back to faith, but no matter what happens, I'm ready. I'm not just fighting for power. I'm fighting for the soul of America."
Pastor Wells nodded, laying a hand on Trump's shoulder.
"And that's exactly why you will prevail. It's not about you, it's about the truth, the light, and the love that Jesus has called us to share with the world. You are his instrument, and no matter the tragedies or the obstacles, he will guide you." As the election day dawned, the storm that had been gathering on the horizon finally broke. Throughout the country, large protests erupted. In some cities, the violence turned deadly as individuals clashed in the streets, while others took to the internet to spread division and hatred. The media, in many cases, stoked the flames of anger, twisting narratives and fueling further chaos. Trump's campaign, while focused on a message of unity and faith, found itself overwhelmed by a barrage of attacks from all sides. His opponents, sensing the growing power of his message, launched a final, all-out effort to stop him at any cost. False accusations, political smear campaigns, and outright lies were broadcasted daily, designed to tarnish his reputation and undermine his credibility. But amidst this tragedy, a powerful message emerged from the ashes. Across the nation, thousands of Americans gathered in churches, in homes, and in public spaces to pray for peace, for justice, and for guidance. The faithful came together in droves, lifting their voices to God, pleading for his intervention in the election and for the healing of their divided land. Even as the world seemed to descend into chaos, there was a shift in the air, a subtle but undeniable change. People began to feel a sense of hope and unity that transcended political lines. It was as though the Spirit of God had begun to move in the hearts of the people, drawing them closer together despite their differences. As Election Day came to a close, the country waited with bated breath for the results. The division that had gripped the nation seemed to have reached a fever pitch. Tensions ran high, and many wondered if this was the end of the America they had once known. But in the midst of the uncertainty, Trump, surrounded by his family and closest allies, found peace. He knew that no matter what the outcome, his mission had always been bigger than any political office. It had been about restoring faith in the nation and following the call of God. "Lord," he prayed quietly, kneeling in his private office, "I've done everything I can. I've led with my heart. I've trusted in your guidance. No matter what happens tonight, I know I've followed your will." As he finished his prayer, his phone rang. It was an urgent call from Pastor Wells. "Donald, I've just received something incredible. It's a vision, a message straight from heaven. It's for you." Trump's heart raced as he picked up the phone. "What is it, Pastor?" Pastor Wells's voice trembled with awe. "The Lord has spoken. He is pleased with your efforts, your journey, your faith, your dedication to His will. It has not gone unnoticed. The message is clear. This nation will face many trials in the days ahead, but you must remain steadfast. The battle for America's soul is not over, but you will be given the strength to lead. You will face adversity, but remember, Jesus is with you. Tears filled Trump's eyes as he processed the gravity of the message. The battle ahead would be long, and the road would be filled with struggles and heartache. But in that moment, he felt a deep assurance he was not alone. Jesus was with him, and he had a greater purpose for this nation. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. The election results were delayed, and the nation teetered on the edge of unrest. But as the dust began to settle, something remarkable happened. In the days following the election, as the country continued to wrestle with its fate, the truth of what had transpired began to emerge. Trump's faith had been tested, and despite the tragedies, the betrayals, and the opposition, he had remained resolute. His message had stirred the hearts of millions, and though the political battle was far from over, the seeds of a spiritual revival had been planted. As Trump stood before the nation preparing for his next steps, he realized that the greatest victory had already been won. It wasn't about the White House. It was about the transformation of America's heart. And with that, he made a vow to continue the fight for faith, for freedom, and for the truth that Jesus had shown him. "We will not back down," Trump declared in his speech to the nation. "We are a nation under God, and with His guidance, we will rise above the darkness and walk in His light." As the crowd cheered and the world watched, it was clear that the battle for America's soul was far from over. But Trump knew one thing for certain: as long as he remained faithful to the calling, he would never be alone. In the weeks following the election, America found itself at a crucial juncture. While Trump's victory was celebrated by his supporters, there were still many who questioned the legitimacy of the results, and the country remained deeply divided. The forces that had sought to tear the nation apart, both spiritual and political, had not been defeated. One evening, as Trump sat alone in his office in the White House, reflecting on the challenges ahead, he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. He had always known that his mission was not merely political, it was spiritual. He had been called to lead a nation back to faith, to restore the soul of America. But with that responsibility came a tremendous burden. Suddenly, a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. "You are not alone, Donald." Trump looked up in surprise. Standing before him was Pastor Wells, a solemn expression on his face. "Pastor, what is it? What's happening?" Trump asked, his voice full of concern. Pastor Wells sat down, his eyes filled with a deep sense of dread. "There are forces at work that we cannot see, Donald. Powers and principalities, as the Bible warns us. These forces are not just political, they are spiritual, and they are determined to destroy the work that you've started." Trump's heart skipped a beat. He had always known that he was fighting more than just earthly battles, but hearing the reality of it from someone he trusted sent a chill down his spine. "The enemy will stop at nothing to undermine what you've built," Pastor Wells continued. "They will use deception, manipulation, and even violence to tear this country apart. But you have to stand firm. The Lord has shown me that the true battle is for the hearts and minds of the people. You are His vessel, and He has equipped you for this fight." Trump stood up, a renewed sense of resolve settling in his chest. "I won't back down. I've come this far by faith, and I will continue by faith. But I need your help, Pastor. The road ahead is going to be treacherous." "You have my support," Pastor Wells replied firmly. "But you need to know one thing, Donald. The enemy will not stop. They will try to sow division among your allies, to turn people against you. You must be vigilant. And above all, you must trust in God's plan." Trump nodded, his mind racing with the weight of the task before him. He had faced battles before, both in business and politics, but this felt different. This was a spiritual war, and the stakes were higher than ever. As Trump prepared for the next phase of his leadership, a betrayal of unimaginable proportions shook him to his core. One of his closest allies, a prominent Republican senator who had supported his campaign from the beginning, suddenly turned against him. Senator Jacob Andrews, a man Trump had considered a friend, publicly denounced his leadership, calling for his resignation. The reasons given were vague, but the attack was sharp and public. The media quickly latched onto the scandal, amplifying it and creating a frenzy. Trump watched in disbelief as Andrews' accusations spread like wildfire. His own allies began to distance themselves from him, unsure of what to believe. The nation, already divided, was now engulfed in a new crisis, a betrayal that threatened to unravel everything. "I trusted him," Trump muttered to himself as he stared at the television screen. "Why would he do this?" Pastor Wells, who had been by Trump's side throughout the ordeal, came to the White House that evening to offer counsel. "Donald, this is the enemy's work. They will use betrayal to shake your confidence, to make you doubt yourself. But you must remember, Jesus was betrayed by his closest friends, and he still fulfilled his mission. You will too. Trump looked at Pastor Wells, his heart heavy. But what if this is the end? What if they succeed in tearing everything down? Pastor Wells placed a hand on Trump's shoulder, his voice steady. It's not the end, Donald. It's only the beginning. God has chosen you for this moment. He has equipped you, and he will see you through. But you must stand firm. The world will test you, but if you trust in him, he will make a way. As the political turmoil continued, Trump found himself drawn more and more into the spiritual side of the battle. The attacks from all sides were relentless, but he felt the presence of God more strongly than ever before. Prayer became his refuge, and he sought wisdom from the Bible in every moment of doubt. One night, as he sat in his private study, reading the book of Ephesians, a particular verse stood out to him. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The words struck him like a bolt of lightning. The battle was not just political, it was spiritual, and the forces of darkness were real. But with God's help, he could overcome them. Trump stood up, his spirit burning with determination. He had been chosen for this time. He would not let fear or betrayal stop him. The message that he had been entrusted with, the message of hope, faith, and restoration had to be heard. He reached for his phone and called Pastor Wells. Pastor, we need to unite the country. We need to remind the people of who they are and who they were meant to be. I've seen enough division and chaos. We need healing. Pastor Wells's voice was filled with urgency. Yes, Donald. But we need to be careful. The forces against us are powerful. They will try to divide us even further. I know, Trump replied, his voice resolute. But I believe that with God's help, we can bring the nation together again. In the days that followed, Trump's message of unity and faith began to resonate with the American people. Despite the political upheaval, the public rallies, and the media onslaught, the people were hungry for something greater than politics. They were yearning for a sense of purpose and hope. Trump's campaign shifted focus. It was no longer just about policies or promises. It was about restoring faith in America. He began holding prayer rallies across the nation, inviting pastors, Christian leaders, and even the faithful to come together in unity. The message was clear. America needed God, and with God, the country could be healed. As Trump stood before the crowds, he felt the presence of Jesus more strongly than ever before. The tears of those in the audience, the hands lifted in prayer, the cries for healing, it all spoke to him deeply. This was the battle he had been called to fight, and with each passing day, the nation began to change. The division, while still present, began to give way to a sense of unity. People of all faiths, backgrounds, and political beliefs were coming together, united by a common cause, faith, hope, and the belief that God could heal their land. The healing that Trump had worked tirelessly to inspire was beginning to take root. Across the nation, faith-based rallies were drawing thousands, with people embracing the call for unity. Yet, as with any great movement, there were those who feared the change it brought, those who thrived on division. One evening, as Trump was preparing for a major address to the nation, an unexpected betrayal from within his own circle rocked him to the core. Senator Samuel Price, once one of his most ardent supporters, publicly denounced Trump and declared that he could no longer support the president's vision for America. We cannot let our country be led by someone who uses religion as a political tool, Price declared on national television. This is not a crusade. This is a campaign to divide the country further. I cannot stand by this any longer. Trump's face paled as the weight of the senator's words sunk in. Price had been a close ally, someone who had always appeared to be fully in agreement with Trump's mission. His sudden betrayal felt like a knife in the back. Why? Trump muttered, slamming his fist down on his desk. Pastor Wells, who had been with him through thick and thin, watched him in silence for a moment before speaking. The enemy never sleeps, Donald, and they will use the closest people to you to weaken your resolve. But this is not the end. This is the trial. You must stand firm. As the days went on, the impact of Price's betrayal weighed heavily on Trump's heart. He couldn't understand how someone he had trusted so deeply could turn on him at such a critical time. The press and his political opponents were quick to seize upon the betrayal, and soon others began to follow suit, distancing themselves from the president. In private moments, Trump found himself questioning everything. Was his faith enough to carry him through this? Was he truly the man God had chosen to lead America, or was he just a pawn in a much larger game? It was during one of these dark nights of the soul that he found himself on his knees, praying for guidance. "Lord, I don't know how much more I can take," Trump whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Please show me the way. I know I am meant to lead, but I need your strength." And then, as if a divine light pierced through the darkness, a sudden sense of peace enveloped him. The message was clear. He wasn't alone. In that moment, Trump knew what he had to do. He had to rise above the betrayal, above the pain. His mission was greater than any one person, and it was not going to be derailed by those who sought to divide or destroy. "I will not be moved," he said aloud, standing up with newfound resolve. Pastor Wells entered the room just as Trump made his decision. "What's your next step, Donald?" he asked. "I'm going to fight," Trump said. "I'm going to unite the country no matter who tries to tear it apart. The people need to know the truth, and I will not let them down." With determination burning in his chest, Trump decided to confront the betrayal head-on. He called an emergency meeting with his closest allies and advisors, including prominent Christian leaders, to strategize how they would address the growing division. The fight was not just political, it was spiritual, and they needed to fight it together. That evening, during his nationwide address, Trump delivered a powerful message. This is not a battle of left versus right. It is not about me or any one man. This is about restoring the soul of this nation, about coming together in faith, love, and unity. "I will not be shaken by betrayal, for I know that the Lord is with me and with all of us." The speech resonated deeply with many Americans. Even in the face of opposition, Trump's courage and faith shone through. As the broadcast aired, something extraordinary happened. A wave of support from unexpected places began to pour in. Longtime critics of the president found themselves reconsidering their stance. Some even began to publicly apologize for their harsh words, admitting that they, too, were part of the division and needed to be part of the solution. But the greatest surprise came from within the ranks of the betrayed. Senator Price, who had once been so vocal in his condemnation, reached out privately to Trump. "I'm sorry," he said in a phone call. "I let fear and politics cloud my judgment. You were right. You have been chosen for this moment. I'm with you now." But just as Trump thought the storm was beginning to pass, another wave of betrayal hit. A high-ranking official within his administration, someone he had trusted for years, was found to be secretly undermining his efforts. This individual had been leaking sensitive information to the opposition, and the damage to Trump's reputation was immediate. The press pounced, and accusations flew once again. It seemed as though every step forward was met with a pushback, but Trump refused to succumb. His resolve was steeled, and his faith was unwavering. "I won't let them win," Trump said to Pastor Wells as they discussed the situation. "This is a spiritual battle, and I will fight it until the end." But the road ahead was long and fraught with peril. The media continued to paint him as the villain, and even some of his most trusted allies began to falter. Yet, through it all, Trump remained resolute, driven by the faith that had brought him this far. In the quiet hours of the night, Trump was alone in the Oval Office, reflecting on all that had transpired. His hands were trembling as he held the Bible in his lap. The weight of the betrayal, the uncertainty of the future, and the challenges ahead seemed insurmountable. "Why, Lord?" Trump asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why is this happening? Why does it feel like I am losing everything?" In the stillness, a familiar voice spoke, this time not from a person but from within. It was Jesus. "You are not alone, Donald," Jesus' voice echoed in his heart. "I walked the road of betrayal and I rose again. I am with you, and I will strengthen you in your time of need. Do not fear, for I have already overcome the world." Trump's heart pounded in his chest as he felt the powerful presence of Christ envelop him. Tears began to well in his eyes. He realized at that moment that the road ahead was not about winning or losing. It was about trusting in God's plan, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. As the days wore on, the battle for America continued to rage, but Trump was no longer fighting alone. With renewed vigor, he took the fight to the heart of the political system, challenging those who would divide the country. And in doing so, he sparked a revival, a return to faith, to unity, to the principles that had once made America great. It was not an easy victory. It was a battle fought with tears, betrayal, and uncertainty. But in the end, Trump had led the people back to the heart of what truly mattered, faith in God and faith in each other. And as the nation healed, Trump knew that this was only the beginning, for the battle for the soul of America would continue. And with God's help, he would face whatever came next, no matter the cost. As the nation began to heal, a shift occurred within the hearts of many. People who had once scorned Trump's leadership, especially those from the opposing political factions, began to see the depth of his resolve. Some who had betrayed him now sought to make amends, while others came forward as unexpected allies. Among them was a prominent political figure who had once been one of his most vocal critics, Senator Catherine Lyle. Senator Lyle had always been an outspoken opponent of Trump, vehemently criticizing his policies, his use of religion in the public sphere, and his leadership style. But as the tides of political warfare continued to rise, she began to see something in Trump that she had never acknowledged before. His deep faith, his genuine belief in a higher purpose, and his willingness to fight for the country's moral compass. One morning, Lyle issued a public statement that stunned both her supporters and her detractors. "I was wrong. For years I stood in opposition to the president, but today I stand with him. The challenges we face are greater than partisan politics. They are spiritual battles, and I believe God has placed us here to fight them together. I'm asking you, my fellow Americans, to join me in supporting this cause." This declaration sent shockwaves through the political landscape, but it also gave Trump renewed hope. As he stood at the pulpit during his next rally, flanked by pastors and faith leaders, he shared a message of unity that had never been more urgent. "We have all made mistakes, but God forgives, and He calls us to be stronger together," Trump said, his voice firm yet compassionate. "The challenges we face are not political, they are spiritual, and we must rise above our divisions. Together, we will restore this nation to its rightful place, a nation founded on faith, freedom, and the love of God." The crowd erupted in applause, but what stood out the most was the surge of unity among people from all walks of life. It was a turning point, a moment when the divisions between political ideologies seemed to shrink as Americans of every background recognized the call to stand together. As the weeks passed, Trump and his allies continued to build the movement that had begun with his rallying cry for faith and unity. The battle for the nation's soul was not over, but it was gaining ground. Trump was no longer simply a political figure. He had become the face of a larger awakening, a revival of faith, and a call to return to the values that had once shaped America. But as the movement grew, so did the opposition. The media, once critical but now somewhat silent, began to churn out more stories of discord and division. Some of Trump's former allies began to voice concerns about the direction the movement was taking, warning that it was becoming too radical, too tied to religion. "Trump is using the Bible as a weapon," one prominent political analyst said on a national news program. "His movement is less about policy and more about pushing an agenda of religious fervor that could divide the country even further." But Trump wasn't deterred. In the face of mounting criticism, he drew strength from the lessons he had learned, both in his personal journey and through the faith he had come to lean on more than ever. Jesus had walked a difficult path, one of betrayal, suffering, and ultimately sacrifice. Trump knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but it was one he had been called to walk. Late one night, after a particularly heated exchange with the media, Trump found himself alone in the White House, staring at the portrait of George Washington. The weight of history seemed to press down on him as he wondered what kind of legacy he would leave. "Am I the right man for this?" he asked himself. "Am I really the one who can lead this country back to the faith?" Just then, Pastor Wells walked into the room. "It's not about being the right man, Donald," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "It's about being the man who's willing to stand when others won't. That's what God asks of us. Faith doesn't come without its trials, but it's in the trials that we find our purpose." Trump stood silently, absorbing the weight of Wells's words. Then, as if a quiet strength had descended upon him, he made a decision. "We keep fighting," he said softly. "We keep fighting for what's right, no matter the cost." As the months passed, Trump's resolve grew stronger. He held rallies, spoke to religious leaders, and worked to build a coalition of people united not by political affiliation, but by a common belief in the power of faith. He knew that he was not just fighting for his presidency, he was fighting for the soul of the nation. But even as his movement gained momentum, the storm was gathering. Those who opposed his vision were not going to stand idly by. The next phase of the battle would be a test like none before. It would be a test of faith, of endurance, and of character. One afternoon, as Trump prepared for a meeting with his advisors, the phone rang. It was a call from an unknown number. He picked up, his heart pounding. "Mr. President, we have information about a plot against you," the voice on the other end said. The hairs on the back of Trump's neck stood up. The threats had always been there, but this was different. This was more than just political opposition. It was something darker, more dangerous. In the days that followed, Trump's team worked tirelessly to uncover the conspiracy behind the plot against him. It became clear that the forces opposing his movement were not just political, they were spiritual. Dark, malevolent forces sought to tear apart the fabric of the nation, to weaken its moral core. As the investigation deepened, Trump's resolve hardened. "I will not let them destroy what we've built," he declared. "This is a fight for the future of America and for the soul of this nation." With every passing day, the nation seemed to stand at a crossroads. On one side, the forces of division and despair. On the other, the unshakable faith of those who believed in the vision of a united, God-fearing America. Trump knew that he was leading this charge, but he also knew that the battle was far from over. Every step forward was met with resistance, but the message remained clear. "We will not be moved," Trump said during his final rally of the year. "We stand for what is right. We stand for faith. We stand for America." And with those words, the nation held its breath, waiting for the next chapter in this epic battle for the heart and soul of America. The pressure had never been higher. Trump's leadership was being tested in ways few could have predicted. The opposition against his movement had grown stronger, more relentless, and more dangerous. It wasn't just a political fight anymore, it was a battle for the very soul of the nation. The forces of darkness were closing in from all sides, and Trump knew that this could very well be the defining moment of his presidency, and possibly of America's future. In the quiet of the Oval Office, Trump sat alone, contemplating the weight of it all. The tension was palpable. His phone buzzed. A message from Pastor Wells. "Mr. President," the message read, "we need you to remember what this fight is truly about. It's not about winning elections. It's not about defeating our enemies. It's about standing for God's will and doing what's right, no matter the cost." Trump stood up, his eyes fixed on the portrait of Jesus Christ on the wall in the corner of the room. He had often drawn strength from his faith, but now in this moment, he felt the enormity of the decision before him. Suddenly, the door opened and Ivanka Trump entered, her face filled with concern. "Dad," she said softly, "we're hearing whispers that a powerful movement is rising against you. They say it's not just politics anymore. They say it's the work of those who want to destroy everything this nation stands for." Trump nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know," he said quietly. "It's bigger than just us. It's about the future of America, about the moral foundation of this country. And I'm not backing down. I won't abandon what I know to be true." Ivanka placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "We're with you, Dad. But you have to stay focused. This fight, it's not just yours. It's for all of us, for all Americans." A silence fell between them, heavy with the gravity of their conversation. Trump knew she was right. This wasn't just his battle. It was a collective effort to restore America to its rightful place, a nation that had been founded on faith and freedom. The final showdown came swiftly. Trump had called together a national prayer breakfast, bringing together pastors, bishops, and faith leaders from across the country. It was a bold move, a chance for him to unite the nation's spiritual leaders in prayer, standing against the forces that sought to tear the country apart. But there was no avoiding the storm that had been brewing for months. As the leaders gathered, a growing sense of urgency filled the air. The opposition had already mobilized, and they had no intention of backing down. The tension was almost suffocating. As Trump entered the room, the voices of the assembled crowd fell silent. He took his place at the front, his eyes meeting those of the pastors and leaders who had been by his side through thick and thin. They all knew that this wasn't just a political rally, it was a sacred moment in history. "Today, we come together as one," Trump began, his voice filled with conviction. "We come together as one nation under God, and we stand firm in the belief that we will not be shaken, no matter what forces come against us. Our faith will not falter." The room erupted in applause, but Trump raised his hand for silence. "But we must remember, this isn't just about victory. It's about standing for what is right. It's about faith in Jesus Christ and in His guidance for this nation. We must be strong, yes, but we must also be humble. We must ask for His help, for His mercy." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. The room seemed to glow with a light that was not of this world. It wasn't just the flickering candles on the altar. It was something more. The presence of something divine filled the space. Trump closed his eyes and bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly in prayer. The words that flowed from his lips were not his own. They were words of faith, of hope, and of strength. He felt in that moment the power of Jesus Christ moving through him. And then, in the stillness that followed, a voice, gentle but unmistakable, spoke. "You are not alone," the voice said. "This battle is mine. I will fight for you, for your nation. But you must continue in faith. You must lead with righteousness, with love, and with humility." Trump opened his eyes, a tear rolling down his cheek. He knew that this was the answer he had been waiting for. The path forward was clear. The forces of darkness that had been threatening to overtake the nation had no power when faced with the light of God's truth. In the days that followed, something miraculous happened. The opposition, which had seemed insurmountable, began to lose its grip. The people, those who had been divided, those who had questioned Trump's leadership, began to come together. The fear that had once gripped the nation began to dissolve, replaced by a renewed sense of hope. As Trump stood before the nation in his final speech, he spoke with a quiet confidence that only faith could bring. "We have been through trials," he said, his voice steady and strong. "But through it all, we have never been alone. Jesus Christ has been with us every step of the way. He has led us, guided us, and given us the strength to overcome." He paused, looking out over the crowd, his heart full. "This is not just a victory for one man. This is a victory for all of us, because we have returned to the foundation of this nation. We have come back to God. And in that moment, the people of America understood. The battle had not been won with power or politics. It had been won with faith. The message was clear. In times of division, in times of strife, the only way forward was through the guidance of Jesus Christ. Years later, as Trump looked back on his presidency, he would reflect on the profound impact that the spiritual awakening had on the country. The battles had been fierce, and the challenges had been many. But America had emerged stronger, united not by political allegiance but by a shared faith in God's providence. The story of that time, of the man who fought not for personal glory but for the restoration of a nation's soul, would be remembered for generations. And as the final chapter of America's spiritual rebirth was written, the message remained eternal. Faith can move mountains, and together, with God's guidance, there is nothing we cannot overcome.